we're gonna be talking about Kamen Rider. We're gonna be talking about
Kamen
two.
Rider!
Jordan will be talking about Kamen Rider Forze. I will be talking
Kamen
about
Rider Forza!
I will be talking about Kamen Rider Geats. And first, background of Kamen Rider. Let's start with the background first. Kamen Rider, for those who don't know, is another show that's very similar to Power Rangers. It's about a costume masked hero who he has a device and he transforms into a hero. The difference being is with the difference between Kamen Rider or Power Rangers and Sentai is instead of being a full team of people, it is typically one guy. Sometimes it turns into two guys. Like there'll be a second guy that comes in about midway. When did yours come in? About midway?
Yeah, probably midway-ish.
About about
20, 20 something.
about midway.
18 or 20.
Yeah. Very rarely you will have it where there's like in my show where there's multiple riders. Sometimes you get a series, and a lot of modern Kamen Rider because they want to sell more toys. They will do like 5 or 6 riders. We're gonna get into that more, but Kamen Rider came out 1971. It's been around since about 1971, and one of the things I watched that I had seen before, which I said I was going to defer, is called Kamen Rider X Super Sentai Superhero Tyson, because the block named after the block of television where these shows air is called Superhero Tyson, and there's a block of television that they air every Saturday, and what's interesting, and it's a weird coincidence, it's funny that you picked the Gokaiger movie, and it's a weird coincidence I gave you Forze, because Super Sentai and Kamen Rider, they are paired with the Sentai. So Forze aired at the same time as Gokaiger. And then eventually
Ah,
about midway
that's
through the
funny.
year, it'll switch. So one of them will
In the
switch.
superhero time lineup.
Yeah, yeah. So what happens is, so for the first half of the first chunk of the year, it was Kamen Rider, Forze, and Gokaiger, and then for the second half of the year, it was Kamen Rider, Forze, and Go Busters, and then eventually Forze ends, and then it'll be Go Busters and Wizard, who comes after Forze, and so they kind of work together. So they'll sort of promote each other's shit in commercials. And so
Mm.
Superhero Tyson, the entire concept of it was it's basically the Avengers. Really, it's really similar to Infinity War, but for Kamen Rider and Super Sentai. So the entire premise of it is who wins in a fight, Super Sentai or Kamen Rider. And for me, it's always been like it's not really much of a discussion point because Super Sentai can just kind of summon giant robots. Like most of the people involved in that could just summon giant for most of the run of that series. They could summon giant robots. Like not the entire run. Like it's not as like early on as you would think, but fairly early on. But what's interesting is there's a line in Superhero Tyson where a character says that if not for the Kamen Riders, the Super Sentai would, if not for the Kamen Riders getting their slot, the Super Sentai would have never gotten their slot. And that's a reference to the fact that Kamen Rider came out first. And they wanted to make another show that was equally as successful. So the same guy who created Kamen Rider also created Super Sentai. And the concept being and the difference being that it would be about teams as opposed to an individual guy. So, do you like
Mm.
Power Rangers, Jordan?
Yeah.
You could thank Kamen Rider for that.
ライダー変身と
Because if not for Kamen Rider, there is no Power Rangers. So,
Very interesting.
yeah, and so when it comes to Kamen Rider, there are typically two flavors of Kamen Rider. There is stoic, but a dick is no, is it stoic but serious, or idealistic but goofball. You've got idealistic but goofball, and your secondary rider is stoic but serious. My main rider
Yep.
stoic but serious. One of my secondary riders silly but idealistic. So with that, what is Kamen Rider Forze's gimmick? What is it? What is it? What is gimmick? His theme? What is his theming? And what is his gimmick?
Well, the theming is space, which apparently was what the theming was for both the 40th anniversary and the 50th anniversary. Space flight, space, that sort of thing.
Really?
And the gimmick is, yeah, according to Wikipedia. And the gimmick is switches.
Yeah,
So they
switches.
switch between the different powers and abilities and
Yeah.
thingamajigs.
And so what is the premise of your opening section of Kamen Rider Forza? Not the whole thing. We're just gonna start with the opening section.
Opening section is a kind of a bad guy of the week, if you will, or of the day, where the Zodiarts, the teachers are giving students the switches, which turn them into the Zodiart
We
monsters.
don't know that yet. We don't. Oh yeah, sorry. I should mention also. We're gonna spoil the shit out of these shows. That's not your in your opening. You don't know that it's the teachers immediately, do you?
Yeah, I
Is
seem to
it?
remember we do pretty immediately on.
Isn't it like it's a mystery of who the main bad guys are for like a little bit? I remember there being more of a
I
mystery.
mean, maybe the first couple episodes, but I remember it being pretty quick on. Not the girl teacher, that's a while, but you find out pretty early on that like there's the old guy who's the chancellor, and there's the like his monsters and stuff. But you see the old guy chancellor pretty immediately on.
Interesting. Interesting. So
Um,
so okay.
I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but
Um.
I my memory after having just watched it is pretty quick on
Yeah.
that you find out that it's one of the teachers.
So for me, my series is Kamen Rider Geats, and the very basically it starts off. See, mine is very deliberately separated into arcs. So I should ask, what is the premise of your series generally? Like, what is it about? Not specifically, but generally.
Generally, it's about bad evil boss guy who's Sagittarius. He wants to have his warriors show up so that he can go deep into space and find the predecessors. And he's
I
going to
mean,
do whatever it takes to get that.
again, you don't know that right away. So what Kamen Rider Forza is about? It's
Well,
about
that's what it's about.
okay,
It's about he's trying to get the powers.
right, but again, that's not the premise. The premise is it's about Gentaro
Yes, it
Kasari.
is.
Hold on, let me finish. It's about Gentaro Kasari, and he winds up and transfers to a new school called ASG. And while he's there, he discovers that there's an underground group of people who are influencing the students by giving them switches, which turns them into monsters. He becomes Kamen Rider Forza by meeting two of the students there, and he transforms into Kamen Rider Forza and fights these Zodiarts. And there's a mystery about exactly who the Zodiarts are and what they want. That's very basically what Kamen Rider Forza is about. Now, Kamen Rider
I mean, you
Geats.
said not to go into too much detail. I didn't go into that much detail.
Kamen Rider
You wanted me to
Geats.
go into that much detail. I could have gone into detail.
Kamen Rider Geats. Um, basically is about this game. It's called the Dream. Oh shit! I completely forgot the name of it. But basically, it's a Grand Prix, the Dream Grand Prix, and a bunch of regular people get recruited to participate in this game, which is effectively battle royale, but with Kamen Riders. And they all participate, or actually, really, it's more like Squid Games with Kamen Riders because they all participate in various games. My bad guys are called the Jamato, and they're kind of plant-like based creatures, and they all get recruited by these producers, these people, and they get dropped into these various games where it's like the Jamato will be one side and they'll be the other side, and they have to defeat them, and they're also competing against each other to survive and succeed and win this game. And whoever wins this game gets their big dream granted. They get to make their quote ideal world, as it were. And the first major arc is really just about this first game. There's multiple riders. So for my series, there's like at first there's like 12 riders. And what's kind of cool is the type of rider they are is sort of based on their personality. So it's all animal based. And so like the main guy Geets, he's a like a trickster kind of guy. He's a sneaky crafty guy, so he's a fox. There's a guy that shows on later on. He's an old man, so he's an owl. He's like a wise old owl.
Mm.
And the main guy, one of the main guys, he's a tanuki. The girl's a cat. And yeah, so the initial episodes are very much about that game. Your series is very basically like each episode is there's a monster, you don't know who they are, and then there's a mystery about figuring out who they are, right?
Well, the characters don't know, but we, the audience, we do. Like, we see the people that are turning into the monsters pretty fast.
Oh, okay.
It's more about the characters that are trying to figure out like who and why, and more. I would say the point is less about in a lot of the episodes anyway, is less about like who is transforming and more why they're transforming and how they
Yeah.
can not like make it so they don't need to transform anymore. How do they
Yeah.
resolve the issue that made them feel like they needed to transform in the first place?
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, behind the scenes, these shows are 48 episodes apiece. And as it turns out, trying to squeeze 48 episodes of television into it that's exclusively in Japanese is very difficult because as much as they are
Plus two
very
movies.
plus two movies, because as it turns out, there's only so many hours in a week, and it's like you're knocking out like 3 episodes an hour. So like I've devoted like this took like 20 hours almost, and like we each have jobs, like day jobs that we have to do, and like other responsibilities that we have to attend to. And you can't just put it on the TV because I have the attention span of a fucking gnat. You can't just put it on the TV because my attention will focus. And if you're not paying direct attention to it because it's not in English, you lose stuff. Like you lose it. You're like wait. And these kind of in these shows.
Or if you've had a particularly tiring day of work, and the last thing you want to do is come home and read,
Yeah.
and reading makes you sleepy, and then you fall asleep, and then the next day you wake up and you're like, shit, I now have to go back 10 episodes because I slept through half of them,
Yeah.
and you put yourself back 20 hours, and then you have to spend all of it today doing it.
And then it's
The
like
point
or
is, and then you go to start doing your podcast, and the stupid thing keeps lagging on you, throwing off all momentum. It's just been a hassle. I'm telling you.
It's just like and like yeah again behind the scenes stuff. Yesterday I'm doing a thing with the computer and it refuses to stay on. So I thought, oh, I'll just delete a bunch of stuff off of the computer, and apparently it's made shit worse because it won't stop being laggy for some reason. The thing that's frustrating about this is like we've gone weeks without having a single fucking technical issue, and it happens sporadically, and I don't know if it's Discord, I don't know what it is, but like
Sporadically.
it's so annoying, and yeah, it's throwing off the momentum of this, and like I'm like I wanted to do this whole big. I had this plan. I thought we could make this go for at least 20 minutes, and that we could turn it into a video. And now the video is going to have this like 2-minute rant in the middle of it where we fucking complain about how aggravating this week has been. And it's such a shame because this season was so good. Like that's what's so frustrating.
I really enjoyed my show. I really had.
At a certain point, a second arc kicks in where they finish the first game, right? And then that leads into the second game, which is more or less the first game over again. And the plot of it is now it's season 2. We're doing season 2. Is there a point in your series where it hits a wild turn and now it's about something else?
Kind of. There's a point where so you've got the different stages when it comes to the monsters. You've got the first stage where they're trying to get them to hit their final form or whatever, and then if they're in that final form long enough, then they turn into what is essentially like the lieutenants, which is the 12 zodiac signs. Um, so arc 2 seems to be they now are pretty much just fighting the generals. and that's where like they've got their Super Saiyan form. Uh,
メテオにも新しいステイツ
the meteor has the comet or whatever, the gold and blue one, and Forze has cosmic.
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say that's arc 2
Okay. Yeah.
personally.
I would agree with that. And for me, like it's what's interesting is like you're right. They tend to have a super form, and going forward from yours, there's a super. You funny call it Super Saiyan, but then there's a Super Saiyan 2 form, which is like the form that's stronger than that super form. That's basically like the combination of all the powers. And Forze doesn't really get one. The closest equivalent would be when he gets, I want to say, lightning. I think it's lightning because that's the one where it's the first time his costume drastically changes.
Yeah, that's the first time his costume changes color.
Yeah. And so
So if I were to put it into Dragon Ball Z terms, lightning would be like Kaioken. Fire would be like Kaioken times 10, and then the cosmic would be his Super Saiyan.
yeah, yeah. And it's fine. I just realized because of all the fucking technical distractions, I realized I forgot to mention what my aesthetic and what my theme was. So each of the Kamen Riders in my series. Oh, I should say, generally speaking, I don't like multiple Kamen Riders in a series. Once you get more than two, it just becomes Sentai or Power Rangers, and I'm like, it's not really why I like them. I like it when it's just the two because you get really focused individualization on the Kamen Rider himself. In terms of not so much the character because there's always side characters, but in terms of his abilities. So the thing I like about Forze is Forze, like they have the same like gimmick, but their abilities are different. So like with Forze, he's got this. They both use switches, but they can't use each other's switches. The fact that they can't use each other's switches is a plot point, and his switches.
Whereas in
do
mine they
different things.
can.
No, in yours they can eventually, but not at first. And it's their powers are not interchangeable. Whereas in mine they are. Like different riders can use the same abilities, and I don't like that. They lose their individualism. So like in W, and let's see the series that comes before yours. No, the series that comes before yours is ours. But anyway, one of the series that comes before yours, like they both use what are essentially like thumb drives. But his whole thing is he's two guys and one guy, and the other guy he's like motorcycle themed. So his form is like a motorcycle. So it's like they used to have similar power set, but they're different. So with mine, they all have ID cores, which basically that's where all the animals come from. So Geets, he's got a fox one guy's got a tanuki, and another one has the girl has a cat, and they couple that with belt buckles, and they put the belt buckles in, and it gives them the different powers. And each of the belt buckles is like there's a scene which is effectively like for you, Battle Royale, you know how like there's the scene where they give them the bag and they each have the weapon in it?
Yeah.
Or remember in Hunger Games, the Quarter Quell, where they all run in and grab a weapon? The first episode of the show is basically that, where they all run in and they all unlock different abilities, and they're all interchangeable. So like one of the guys, and it's a funny series because you could tell. Okay, the thing about this show is it's still television. So like it becomes certain arcs, and it's a children's television show. So certain arcs become evident early on, and like in the case of a series with multiple riders, you can tell the longer the rider is going to stick around by how detailed his costume is. So there's 3 ones that show up really early on, and they have really detailed costumes, and you're like, well, obviously they're going to be main characters, and they're going to be here the whole time, and then sure as shit they make it to the end. But like, so the one guy, his one buckle is called Zombie, and the thing about Kamen Rider ultimately is it's really about aesthetics. So it's about how much do you like the aesthetic, how much do you like the costumes, because if you can't get into the costumes, if you can't enjoy the costume design, you're not going to enjoy the rest of the show. And there's a lot of standout costume designs in yours. Like there's so many. Some of the Zodiarts are so good.
I like a lot of the Zodiarts. I like a lot of the monsters. Borze's helmet I don't like.
I don't love it in like retro, like compared to like and as I when I eventually do cut this into a video, I'm gonna try to splice in some stuff I want to show you. But I like Geats' design way better. Like just way better. I don't. I in retrospect, I really liked Forze's design at first because coming from Power Rangers, right? It's different than Power Rangers. I like that about it. And yeah, I get that it's trying to look like a rocket ship. That's its design.
Yeah.
But you're right. I don't love the helmet. And he's too his abilities are too bulky looking, in my opinion. It makes some of his fight sequences look clumsy. But that's part of his character, to be fair. That's kind of what makes his character fun.
That's true.
He's kind of failing upward. Like a lot of that show is just him failing upward.
In that way, he reminds me of Naruto or like that kind of character.
He reminds me
Goku.
He reminds me a lot of Goku. I think that's maybe why I like him so much. But yeah, so there's one guy who his belt buckle is called Zombie, and he turns into this purple guy, and he's got like long, like a claw-like hand, and his weapon is a chainsaw sword. And it's fucking sweet.
Dope.
Yeah, it's so fucking dope. And there's so many, like, the back half of this series, so many of the suit designs are just, they're so sleek, and they're so, like, I like my suits when they're a bit more sleek and they're a bit more badass. And the cool thing about Kamen Rider is each of the riders fight differently. So, like, your guy fights differently. Your guy's rough. His fighting style is rough. Mine's a lot more refined because he's been doing this tournament, these games for, like, anyway. So,
then Meteor is like a Bruce Lee.
Yeah, Meteor's like a Bruce Lee guy. Complete with a like yeah. At one point, he straight up does the 10-inch punch or whatever, and it's fucking badass. So what's your third arc? Would you say there is a third arc?
Third arc is kind of like, okay, we've hit the end game now. It's less about like activating the students and more about like getting the last of the boss Zodiarts to come out so that he can get their switches, and so that Sagittarius, I'm a Sagittarius. That was me.
Sagittarius is dope as fuck. He's dope as fuck.
So that he can achieve his final ultimate mecha, super important, cool, badass, Japanese hey ho, final plan.
And yeah, he wants to go meet space aliens in space. That's his evil plan.
Yeah, at the expense of Japan.
At the expense of Japan. It's so weird. The one thing about that season is it's weird how many teachers are just perfectly willing to murder students. Like so many of them are just cool with killing students.
Not just killing students, but seeding out what is essentially drugs. Into their own population.
Pretty much, yeah, effectively, yeah. And it's funny because I finished watching the last of it with him, and it's so funny, like and it's a similar thing with my series where, like, people are getting blown up and shot with lasers and like tossed around and hit in the face, but it's so much more aggressive and violent when they're doing it as people. Like when it's people fighting each other, you're like, oh, this is off-putting. Like at one point in mine, I mentioned this to you last night, but it still makes me laugh. One of the characters just has a gun. She just has not a Kamen Rider or like space gun, but just like a regular normal person gun, and just straight up shoots a guy in the stomach and he's bleeding out. And you're like, man, I understand why this doesn't work in America. So for me, I've got way more arcs to get through. So my third arc, so at the end of the second arc, so initially you kind of think that despite being called Kamen Rider Geats isn't really in it a ton. He shows up here and there, and he's kind of in the background, and it's more about this other guy Kamen Rider Tycoon, and about this Kamen Rider Nago, and it's about them more, and they're more of the main character. And he's the idealistic one. His main dream is he wants to save the world and all that stuff. And there's this sort of mystery about what's the deal with it's Desire Grand Prix, that's what it's called. And there's this sort of what is the deal with the Desire Grand Prix, because there's a lot of moments where it's like they say, okay, the Jamato are showing up and they're killing and attacking people, and if you compete in this game and you beat enough of them, you'll save the world, and as a bonus you get to wish for whatever you want, and we reset the world and the whole thing starts over again. But it's very strange because the Jamato are participating in these games, so like they're following the rules of the game. So like for one of the games they're playing what is essentially a citywide basketball game where the one side has to like get the ball in the hole in the hoop or whatever. And it's like, well, okay, why, if this is about stopping the Jamato and if it's about saving the world, why are they participating in it? Why are they going along with it? It seems like both sides are in on this. So then at the end of the second arc, towards the end of the second arc, there's sort of three people involved in the show, in the games, I should say. There's the navigator, who is the person who gives the belts and stuff to all the riders and essentially recruits them. And then there's the game master, the game master and the producer. And the game master essentially designs and comes up with the games, and the producer oversees it all. And Kamen Rider Geek starts to ask too many questions. He's basically, it turns out that he's been participating in these games for like a long time and just keeps winning and keeps wishing for all these rules. And at one point he wished that he could continuously just participate in the Desire Grand Prix over and over and over again. Yes.
So certain elements of what you're describing sound very similar to The World Ends with You.
Yeah, that's another close comparison. Yes, absolutely. It's weird because as it goes on, it changes. It starts off as one thing and it changes into a bunch of different things. So then, Kamen Rider Geets, he ultimately, it turns out that he's been doing this for a while, and one of his wishes, he's won a few times, and one of his wishes is that he can just continuously compete in these games. And at the end, he wins the first season, the first game, and his wish at the end of it is that the production of these games will now be his family. So the navigator is his sister, and the game master and concierge is his dad. And he's trying to basically figure out what the deal is with these games and where they came from and what they are. And so the second game happens, and towards the end of it, the game master goes rogue basically and decides that he needs to kill Kamen Rider. He needs to retire Kamen Rider Geets. And effectively what happens is either you die as a Kamen Rider, and if you die, that's it, you're dead. You're permanently dead. But if you lose one of the games, you get retired and you just return to your normal life. So it's better that you lose than you die. So in a lot of these games, the Kamen Riders will team up and like work together to ultimately win the game and prevent people from dying. And so the game master effectively decides that Kamen Rider Geese is getting too close to discovering the truth about the games and what they are and solving the mystery. And he decides to start stacking the game against Kamen Rider Geese and trying to cheat and make him lose. And he starts to go like slowly insane. Tries to make it so he loses. Anyway, he ends up winning. He ends up beating the game master. And the producer comes in and is basically like, yeah, you've been cheating and you've been like stacking the deck against him. You're out now, basically. There's now a new game master. And the new game master comes in, and I said all that to basically be like, and now the game changes, and the third arc is its big brother.
Like Batman?
No. I mean, like, you know, like the reality show Big Brother?
No.
No, you don't know the reality show Big Brother. It's basically a bunch of people live in a house together, and they do various games, and like they vote each other out. Survivor in a house, basically.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. And then they have like confessionals where it becomes basically, actually, I should have said it becomes a reality show. So at the end of that season, you find out that the whole game, the whole thing, the whole Desire Grand Prix is a television show. It's a TV show, and there's a ton of spectators. And the new game master is leading into the fact that it's now a television show, and it's they're playing it up for the drama. And so it's a reality show complete with confessionals. So like they'll play games, and it'll cut to the characters just saying confessionals, and like talking about their stuff. And they introduce a trader mechanic. So it basically becomes Among Us. So they're all competing to win the Desire Grand Prix, but also now there is a traitor, or as they call it, the Disaster. And the Disaster basically has a secret mission, and they have to ultimately sabotage the other Kamen Riders. And if they at the end of each of the games, they vote on who they think the Disaster is, and if the Disaster can make it to the end of the game, like to the top 2, then they automatically win. You know,
this sounds really, really complicated.
It kind of is, but
I got to be honest. It's
I know. So it basically becomes Among Us, and it basically becomes Among Us. You know Among Us, you know how Among Us works. Basically, becomes
I do.
That. And so, you know how in those kind of games, if you do something like it's about not being suspicious, right? So in that arc, they introduce basically they bring in a bunch of new Kamen Riders, and they all die, or there's less of them now because it's about the reality show aspect of it. And they bring in 2 new riders, and one of them, his name is Daisuke, and he is the kind of character like who's like really arrogant, like super smart, and like, you know, the type of anime character where their whole bit is they're smart and arrogant. And they speak really slow.
So the dude that was in mine that became an alien.
Yes, kind of. It's very similar to him. And he shows up, and they there's the whole. It's one of those things where this is where it's a show, and you know how it's gonna work. So there's 2 new characters that come in, and immediately you're like, well, they're the 2 new characters, so they're gonna get eliminated. Like first, because they're not the main guys. They haven't been here since the beginning. So, and their costumes are less detailed. So they're not going to stick it out. They're going to get voted up. And then sure enough, there's a whole bit in the early on in that arc where the one tycoon who is basically a super idealist, like goody two shoes guy, they all suspect him of being the Disaster because he finds out that the Jamato are essentially like absorbing humans and like taking their intelligence and their knowledge or whatever, and they can now turn into humans. And so one of them turns into one of the previous Kamen Riders, and he hesitates because he thinks that they're humans basically, and if he kills them, he's going to be killing humans. And so he hesitates, and they're all like, "Why did you hesitate to kill the Jamato? Like, it's our job to kill them. Your hesitation is causing us to lose. You're clearly the Disaster." And so he goes and he tells Daisuke that this detail, and he's basically like, don't say anything. We don't want to freak anyone out. We don't want to cause them to like have any emotional strain. And it gets to the point where they're about to vote on him, and they're about to vote on who the Disaster is. And he's like, oh, they're like, well, why didn't you attack? Why didn't you attack? And he's like, oh, I didn't attack because he turned into he was saying human stuff, and I thought he was a human. And I told you, Daisuke, right? I told you, Daisuke. And he was like, no, you never said that. You never told me that. I have no idea what you're talking about. And it's like, what? I was like, well, okay, obviously then he's the Disaster. He's the Disaster then. Like, why would he not just tell the truth? And so then it gets to the end of that episode, and obviously they all go like, well, it turned out, they all find out that, yeah, these guys are talking with human voices. And he's like, well, why did you lie about that? You're clearly the Disaster. And so they all end up voting him out. And it turns out he's not the Disaster. And it was like, well, why did you lie then? Why did you lie when they asked you about the... Why didn't you say, yeah, he said it? Why did you make yourself immediately suspicious, dipshit? And so then for the rest of the series, he became dipshit. Like, that's so every time he'd pop up, and I'd be like, oh, it's dipshit. And I had this little sketch in my brain where I'm like, oh, it's dipshit. There's dipshit. And he'd be like, no, my name's Daisuke. Oh, yeah, that's right, dipshit. Yeah. and he's like,
That's,
oh,
that's what I said.
that's what I said,
dipshit.
dipshit. And it's just like, dude, you did this to yourself. And he comes back later on, and he comes back for like revenge. And he's like, oh, I'm so mad about the disaster thing. And I was like, you did this to yourself. And that's the third arc. And then very briefly, because the third arc took way too long to describe, you find out that the people running the Desire Grand Prix are from the future. They're from the far future, and they're basically spectators. And they're here. They set up this game, and they're just here for entertainment. And you find out that each of the Kamen Riders are all sponsored by a particular person. And so it's funny how you're like, oh, Cosmic States is your Super Saiyan. Geets, he has like 4 or 5 Super Saiyans. He gets his first one, where basically you find out that he hit the whole Desire Grand Prix is basically being like, they're using this woman who turned into a goddess basically, and she's using her powers to grant all these wishes, and it turns out she's Geets' mother, and he's been reincarnating for like hundreds and hundreds of years, thousands of years, and he remembers all of his reincarnations, and so he has all these wishes that have gone unfulfilled, and they become fulfilled, and he gets this new form, which is effectively Cosmic States, and it becomes about upgrading that form. And so eventually one of the sponsors is a super strong Kamen Rider, gives him his thing, and it becomes Super Saiyan 2 and Super Saiyan 3. And very long story, very short. They go through several iterations. It turns out that the Jamato are not actually evil. They were created purely to exist in this game and be slaughtered by Kamen Riders. And they're fighting back because they're tired of just being endlessly slaughtered.
That's fair.
Yeah, and it becomes like this morally gray, like, who really is the bad guy kind of thing. And yeah, the designs are fun. And I'm trying to like do this quickly because it feels like I'm summarizing.
You have been for the past while.
One of the things I love about my season is there's a surprising number of white people in it, Americans. Actually, not Americans, British people. There's my two favorite riders, who they don't get names, but basically one of the main ones, Kamen Rider Nago. She's a rich influencer, and she's got 2 bodyguards who are constantly, her whole bit for the most of the series is, there's a ton of twists in this series, like a ton. And it's so funny because I was like, I gave you Kamen Rider Forze because I was like, I knew it would be simple and I knew it wouldn't be convoluted. Hearing mine, does it sound convoluted?
Oh, yours sounds absolutely convoluted.
Yeah. So this one reminds me a lot of Kamen Rider Build. Build was like this because I don't know if you remember all the times I came out and was describing Kamen Rider Build to you, and every time you'd be like, "This sounds insane," but it's like it's so entertaining. And yeah, the music is phenomenal. The music, I mean, I showed you the theme song. The music is so good. And my series is a newer one. It's the second newest one. So there's a lot of the cinematography is so good. It's funny, we were making fun of the CGI in yours. It's not great, mind you, but it's starting to look like it's from 2008. So like it looks decent for what this show is capable of. And it's the one time where I didn't mind multiple Kamen Riders. Like I fell off of Kamen Rider Gaim, because this one shares a lot of similarities with Gaim. I'm gonna spoil the end of Gaim, but at the end of Gaim, he becomes a god essentially, and him and one of the girls become a god, and that's how this ends. This ends with he basically takes the power from his mother and ascends and becomes a god and remakes the world where everyone can be happy and whatnot. And they're very similar in that regard. Anyway, sorry, the two guards. There's her 2 bodyguards are a black guy and a white guy. And you find out later on in the series that they were also Kamen Riders. But what's funny is because they're American, well, the one of them's British and the one of them's American, there's scenes where they're just talking English to each other. Like,
Oh, that would be weird.
Like there's this moment where they're talking about how the girl hasn't tried to escape in a while. So I just like to think like in their spare time, they just speak like when they're off the clock or when it's just them, they just talk English to each other. But it turns out that they're common. It turns out that they're common riders, and they had participated in a previous Desire Grand Prix. But because they're bigger than Japanese people, obviously no Japanese stunt person would look right. So you never see them transform. Like you just see them. The one guy you see him like he does the sequence, and they have their whole like. So it's funny. You asked me earlier. You were like, "Is the doing the hand motions like part of it? Do they have to do that?" And no, because in Kamen Rider Gaim, the first time he transforms, he does it accidentally. And
Lock on!
どうすりゃいいんだこうかオレンジって俺
he's like, what is going on? What is happening? And then the next time he does it, he does the hand motions. So no, it's funny because each of these Kamen Riders and Geats all have their own hand motions. So there's scenes where there's like 4 or 5 of them all transforming. And like they're all doing stupid hand motions, and some of them are more elaborate than others. It's so, but it's funny. So there's a really fun moment later on where Gaim's sponsor, who's like his biggest fan, shows up, and you think Gaim is dead. Not Gaim. Geats. You think Geats is dead, and he does Geats' transformation hand motions, and it's really funny. It's a really fun callback. But yeah, one of Geats' lives is he was a white guy. He wasn't like for one of his reincarnations. He wasn't always Japanese. For his second reincarnation, he's just a white guy. And
that's funny.
So there's a scene where you see all of his mothers over all of his reincarnations, and one of them's just straight up a white woman, and it's like, what the weird, so strange. Yeah, it's so
one of these things just ain't like the other.
It's so bizarre. So with yours, what's interesting for you, is like I said, with each of these
FaceTime,
each of these series, they all have a movie. And they all have a team-up movie, and they're usually called war movies. So they all have vignettes. So one of the vignettes is usually, so like for yours, there was one where it's O's and was it O's? No, it's Wizard, and Forze, and each of them have their individual story, and then in the ending, at the end of it,
that hurt.
They team up together and they fight a big bad thing. So Forze has come back a lot. He's been in quite a number of movies and quite a number of sequels. So one of yours is, and I would encourage you maybe to check them out in your spare time because they're pretty interesting. But there's one where it takes place 5 years later, and basically you find out that Gentaro he actually still is at the school, and he works for the school now, and he is basically Suspenders guy.
Yeah,
he's him. Effectively, he is now taken over as the teacher sponsor of the Kamen Rider Club, and it ends with him giving up the powers basically, and he stops being Forze. And then there's what's interesting about Kamen Rider as a whole, and Sentai and Tokusatsu, I found, is the willingness of these guys to just come back and be these characters endlessly is remarkable. Like the guy who plays Marvelous, he's come back a ton. Like not even all of Gokaiger, but just him, just to be in stuff. He's come back like a bunch, and they've done a bunch of sequel movies, and a bunch of additional stuff. The one I watched, the superhero Tyson, takes place after or during I think Forze. So he shows up in that, and he's a main character in that. And that one's kind of interesting. That one's fun because at the end of it, very long story, very short. One of the riders ends up summoning a robot, one of the big robots, and he's attacking everybody. There's a moment at the end where basically the plot of that movie is all of the enemies of the Kamen Rider and all of the enemies of the Super Sentai have teamed up to basically kill all of them. And there's a moment at the end where a bunch of them all grow big, like you do in a Super Sentai or Power Rangers, and the Go Busters fight them in their, for lack of a better word, Megazord. And one at the end, he ends up with one of the Kamen Riders, Kamen Rider D End, winds up with this thing, and he summons a bigger robot, and he's fighting them in the bigger robot, and they give the Kentaro comes out, Kenta, the guy who's a huge dick, he comes out and he gives Kamen Rider Forze 2 new switches, and he jumps in to the yellow Go Busters Zord and starts piloting it, and he uses his switches and it summons a rocket, and he punches them with the rocket punch.
That's cool.
That's what I was gonna say. So there's a bunch of movies. So his summer movie, one of his summer movies, you know how he randomly shows up with that form, which was the 2 rockets?
Yeah.
That's from the movies. He gets that in one of the movies.
Oh.
Yeah.
That explains that.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the ones that you said. Or it's one of them. It takes place between like episode 16 and 17, and yeah, that's where he gets that. And then there's another one where he has a form which is essentially a fusion of him and Meteor. So it's Meteor states, and it's pretty cool.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's got his basically it's Forze's head with Meteor's body essentially, and it's them. Not I don't think they're like, I think he just takes his powers. I don't think that they're actually fused together. But yeah, it's pretty cool. And the movies are always fun. They're always like, oh, they get a bit more of a budget, and that's typically where like they'll introduce the next guy. So like in the Sentai movies, they'll introduce the next team and the Kamen Rider. So like in the Kamen Rider O's movie, they introduced Kamen Rider Wizard. He shows up and he does one scene, and that's generally where you get an idea of his powers and all that sort of stuff. What else did I want to cover about Geats? I talked about Dipshit. Oh yeah, so eventually Dipshit comes back, and there's the show eventually establishes a villain in this sponsor who effectively just wants to create destruction, and he teams up with her a bunch, and his whole thing is his wishes. He wants the collective memories and knowledge of all humanity, so he becomes a Jamato and kills one of the guy's sister. And there's a bunch of really sick, like towards the back half of the series, they all get their like final forms basically, and they're all dope and they're all badass. There's this one guy who his final form is essentially like a samurai ninja guy, and he's super cool. Yeah, Geats' final form is really cool. And yeah, anyway, so he comes back, and he absorbs the memories and knowledge of humans, and he realizes that you can gain happiness just from being like a regular person, from just being happy and a good person. So he changes alliances and he becomes a good guy, and he changes all the Jamato essentially into good. They become good by the end of it, and it's kind of cute. And so I kept calling him Dipshit, and if it was like, oh, it's Dipshit, here's Dipshit, Dipshit's back. And then at a certain point, it became a fun, like, loving nickname. It was like, oh, Dipshit. Now it's a nice nickname. It's meant lovingly. It's no longer meant as an insult.
It's a term of endearment.
It's endearing now. Yeah.
It's a term of endearment now.
It's a term of endearment. Yeah. And the thing about Kamen Rider that's interesting is the acting is so much better than the show they're in. Like, that's the thing about it. There's so many moments where you're like, wow, and like, apparently I was reading about it in Japan. Kamen Rider is a stepping stone for good actors to go do better stuff, basically. So like, the guy who plays the main guy, Kamen Rider Forza, he went off and he's apparently been in a ton of like award-winning Japanese movies, and there's so many scenes where you're like, oh, I'm not really feeling this character. His character doesn't really have much. And then by episode 30, you're like, wow, like this character has so much emotion. And I one thing, as much as watching 48 episodes in a week was a challenge, it was a challenge. there's definitely something to be said about watching 48 episodes of television. Like I mean, you cared. You were starting to get a little misty at the end. You were
A little bit.
feeling feelings for these characters. Like it's so I don't know if it's organically good, if it's manipulative, but it like yeah, by the end of it, like you really feel for these characters, and when they die or when they and these shows aren't afraid to kill characters off. Like they're not afraid to hurt
Yeah.
people. They're not afraid to be violent. Um,
More than Power Rangers,
More
for
than
sure.
Power Rangers, for sure. It takes itself seriously. Like, it's not afraid to have the people do a screaming monologue while wearing the costume. Like, there's so many moments in Gates where, like, they're doing these really intense, like, emotionally intense monologues and they're wearing the costumes. And Japan's not afraid to, like, have a character. And it's like you said, their faces and they're so expressive, but they're so good at emoting, like, with their voice. It's like,
Yeah.
it's like yeah. It's like it's not just. And it's funny because they're not half the time they're not in the suits, so yeah, it has to be on their voice, and they're not just good actors; they're good voice actors too.
And that has everything to do with the fact that in Japan, a lot of words sound the same, and it is the inflection that
Yeah,
makes the words different.
exactly.
So
Yeah,
that definitely plays into it.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and what's interesting is that and the demographic for Kamen Rider, I think I mentioned it earlier, but I probably got froze out. Who knows? Is generally for 8 to 9 year olds, 8 to 9 year olds, and incredibly middle-aged suburban moms in Japan, like Japanese housewives, love Kamen Rider, and that's why it gets so like. Okay, they love like, Japanese housewives love Kamen Rider. Do you see why? I guess maybe is what I should ask.
Yeah, to a degree, it definitely screams a show that you can put on and your kid can enjoy, and while they're enjoying it, you don't hate it.
Yeah, well, for me, it's like, especially mine, it's very much like you put it on and the kids love the superhero, the costumes, the lasers, the that, and then the moms love the melodrama. Like mine in particular, yours is way less. I give you one of the less melodramatic ones, but um they love it's melodramatic as a soap opera a lot of times, where people are getting killed off, brought back, resurrected. There's twists and turns, and like, oh, I didn't see that coming. Like there's a lot of times where I was like, oh, genuinely, oh, I wasn't expecting that. Oh, I didn't see that coming. And I know you felt a similar way. There's a lot of moments where you were like, I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, there was definitely a few twists and
I
turns.
would say that the writing on this show is better than it should be. Like this show, like it's so funny because like I recommend this show to people, and I fully do. Fully recommend any season of Kamen Rider. I'm gonna talk about in a minute how I feel you should get into this franchise. I think your season's a good starting point, but um a lot of people I go, you got to watch this show. It's really good. Like it's really good. You would like it. And they get put off by the silly costumes and they picture Power Rangers. And I'm like, you gotta remove yourself from Power Rangers. It's not Power Rangers. It's better than Power Rangers. It takes itself seriously. It takes itself 1,000% seriously. And it's like, even when it looks silly, it works, and it's so good. And that leads me to my question, Jordan. My ultimate question: did you enjoy it?
Yeah, I did. I would the way that I would describe, if I was trying to get
As a sorry, I'm just
the
gonna cut you.
average person.
I just want to qualify one thing. As a person who has never watched this before, this is the first time you've ever watched this. Did you like it? There we go. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Continue.
Yes, I did. I enjoy it in the same way, and this is the way that if I was to try and get a person to watch this, the way that I would say it is, if you enjoy anime, this has all the best qualities of a good anime.
Right.
Mine did anyway.
Right.
Um,
It's live action anime, like a good
it's
anime.
it is a good live action anime where, yeah, it's silly, yeah, it can be over the top, but it also has that, especially in mine being a high school kind of drama scenario. It has all the good inter like relationship qualities that
Yeah.
like a Haruhi Suzumiya show has, or I mean,
Sailor
that
Moon.
to me is a perfect
That's
example of that has Sailor Moon. Like those have your sci-fi battles like this does with the weird monster gimmicky stuff, but it also has the interpersonal drama stuff
yeah,
as well.
absolutely. It has heart.
So
It
I would
has heart.
definitely say that this is written like a solid anime is.
And the guy who plays Kamen Rider 4 is one of those people. I love that character so much. I genuinely do. That when there's been a few times where I'm watching they've done a few anniversary specials, a few anniversary seasons. There's one where it's there's two. One of them's not good in my opinion. That's Kamen Rider Decade. That's the 10th anniversary special. And then they have one. Oh, that's what I was gonna say. That was one of the things I was gonna mention real quick. Um, very brief history of Japan. Um, Japan, Jordan, I'm not sure if you know this, is still a monarchy. They have an emperor, a king still. And so each era of this show is separated by a historical era. So, early Kamen Rider or early Godzilla movies, to relate it to stuff that you're more familiar with, like the original Godzilla movies, are from the Showa era. Um, what you watched is from the Heisei era. And what I'm watching is from the Reiwa era. And the Reiwa era is a lot cleaner, a lot slicker. The Heisei era is a lot rougher and sillier. Which is where, and yeah. So it's they're two different eras of Kamen Rider show. I meant to mention that up top as part of the history. But so you enjoyed it. Follow-up question. Would you watch another one? Not Super Sentai, but would you watch another Kamen Rider?
Yes, but not in a week.
Not in a week. Yes, without the element of having to finish it in a week. If I gave you 2 weeks, would you watch another one of these?
Yeah, depending on what the vibe felt like.
So here's
If I
here's what
thought that it felt fun,
here's what I'll say. Okay, when it comes to Kamen Rider, if you're like, oh, I want to watch this show, it sounds interesting, I'm into this, I don't mind reading some subtitles, and you want to know which season to start with, where to start. Some people are going to be like, start from the beginning of Kamen Rider. Don't do that. Not. I would only recommend. Same thing with Super Sentai. I would never recommend someone go back. I tried watching the Sentai that Power Rangers, the original Power Rangers, is based off. It was rough. It was a painful experience. Mostly because it's old. And there's a lot of bad child acting. Anyway, that's a topic for another day. Go with a modern one. So I would say pick a seat for you. Okay, so when we do this again, because I would absolutely love to do this again, and hopefully it's more successful next time. When I do this again, I want you to pick it on your own, and I want you to pick a season, pick a Kamen Rider season on your own, and this is how I would recommend you do it. Pick an aesthetic you like. So that's why I had you identify the theme and the gimmick. So the theme and gimmick, obviously, for yours is space and switches, and also try to find switches. Find a premise you like. So you could absolutely, if you want to, you can continue on and do the next season, which is Kamen Rider Wizard, which is about magic, and using spells, and his belt is using spells and stuff, and that's pretty fun. The one that follows him is Kamen Rider Ghost. And he is about he's literally what it sounds like. He dies, and his is about trying to find the powers to come back to life. And pick an aesthetic and a story you roughly like, and go from there. Try to avoid anniversary seasons if you can, because when it comes to Kamen Rider, they're never as good as Gokaiger. Gokaiger is nice because you don't have to have a working knowledge of Sentai to enjoy that season. But for a lot of this, they get kind of confusing. Like Decades, okay, or W. You would also like W. W is also good. That's a hard-boiled detective noir kind of story. But yeah, pick an aesthetic and pick a story that you like. Like there's one season that's about video games that's quite good, and that's what I would recommend people start. But like I said, if you're a fan of Power Rangers and you find that Power Rangers is a little too child friendly for you, you're like, oh, this is too much for kids. I highly recommend going to Japan and watching this stuff because yeah, it's kind of violent. Like there was one moment in mine where the guy like jumps on the guy he's fighting and like arm bars him and just straight up breaks his arm. Like he arm bars me like snap, and it's like, oh, that's what it would look like if someone used an arm bar to break an arm. Interesting. And yeah, it's yeah. So if you like reasonable violence that's not over the top and good solid character drama, Geats is good, man. It's a good series. There's excellent the choreography's good. It's like I said, these series for me live and die on their costume design and their aesthetics, and the costume design in both of these series. Like that's the first one I watched, and it's really good. And it's a nice, easy. Would you say it's a nice, easy beginner series to get into for this?
Forza? Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say Forza is, yeah.
Yeah, it's not overly complicated. The characters are like nice and easy to get into, and
yeah.
So, with that having been said, we're gonna do a part 3. I'm totally kidding, Jordan. I just saw Jordan flinch. No, we're not doing a part 3. We are gonna do a Super Sentai episode one day. We're gonna come back to this because I want to do a Super Sentai / Ultraman special. Talk about some Ultraman stuff. But that will be over the course of probably multiple weeks as well. We're gonna take 2 weeks to watch. I think what we might do next time is I think we'll do watch some Ultraman stuff, and we'll split up in 2 parts, and we'll do it as a 2-parter. So we'll do first 1 week we'll do half of it, and then the other week we'll do. You know what? In fact, maybe we'll do it this way. 1 week we'll do half of it. Second week we'll do the other half, and we'll fold in some summer movies in there as well, and we'll come back to this because I love this genre. Quite honestly, this is maybe my way of like working my way into doing a spin-off of this where I just talk about that stuff because I love that stuff. I feel like it's underrated in the West. Like I say, like there's this weird like conflict between Power Rangers fans and Sentai fans that I feel shouldn't exist because like it's all great. It's all great stuff. It's super fun. But that was our epic 2-parter. It wound up being 2 hours. Incredible.